Today's guest is Tony Romano, a guitarist who's been a cornerstone of the New York City music scene for over 2 decades. Known for his beautiful tone and remarkable technique, Tony's versatility spans jazz, Latin, pop, and Broadway, with collaborations including Randy Brecker, Michael Feinstein, and Joe Bataan. His playing has been featured on BBC's Third and Bird, Discovery Channel's Going, Going, Gone, and NPR podcasts. So join us as we explore Tony's incredible journey as a performer, recording artist, and educator. So, Tony, good to see you.
Yeah, likewise, Abe. Thanks.
Tony, your versatility on the instrument, I think that's something that really stands out and sets you apart from, you just your standard, jazz guitar player, just the ability to play all these other styles as well. How did like the early connections, starting off in New York, how did they shape your playing, and your approach to music, you think? Because being in a city like that and those collaborations, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, it's kind of a little bit of an unconventional path. As a kid, I was a trumpet player from 8. I think I kind of started putting the trumpet down around 14. I picked up the guitar around 13. Everybody in my house played guitar, and I wanted to play rock, so kind of transitioned to playing guitar as my main instrument, and I kind of like, did the rock thing, blues stuff all through high school. I gigged through high school a lot, playing in original bands and cover bands. And then it's funny, but like I never really listened to jazz or was influenced by it at all until close to my, mid 20s, really. And I was at a point in my life where I didn't know what I wanted to play anymore. I had been playing a lot of fusion stuff, like Steely Dan type stuff, instrumental rock, I would say, or fusion stuff, but I hadn't really delved into jazz as such. And then it was just, serendipitous. One day I was home and my sister had this pretty good record collection, and I was thumbing through it and I pulled out a bunch of great records, and there was a Coltrane record, and I put it on, and it was Impressions. The first tune was Impressions, take one. And before I got a minute into it, I was like, that's what I want to do. It was like a lightning bolt. And I immediately got myself a teacher. And because up to that point, I was pretty much all self-taught. I took a couple of lessons here and there at the local music store, but it was all by ear, listening to records, picking things off. And once I heard Coltrane, I was like, that's the kind of expression I'm interested in music. And so then I just started studying with this adjunct professor from NYU, Gilbert Plantinga, who got me on a really good track. And I'll try to keep this as short as possible.
No, this
But
is great. I love this. This is great.
I was an auto mechanic out of high school. That's what I did. I worked for local garage, and I worked for Chevy and Ford. So once I heard Coltrane, I decided on a plan, and I saved all my money for about a year and a half, and I was studying once a week and practicing. I would get up a couple of hours before I'd go into the shop and play, and then I'd come home and play. I wasn't hanging out with my friends. I was like on a, just a really strict sort of regimen. And then I remember I saved about 10 grand, and I sold my tools so I couldn't work on cars anymore, and paid my rent for the year. And I practiced. Like I literally paid my rent for the year because rent was cheap back then. And I practiced 8, 9, 10 hours a day, started going and hanging out, meeting people. And so that's what got me on the professional track of playing and getting into teaching, which I always have loved. Um, and I was always around great teachers growing up, so I had some really good influential people, not just in music. So I kind of always had an affinity for that, connection to those people. And but as far as the musical genres go, growing up, my mom played classical guitar, so I heard a lot of Segovia, Julian Bream, Pepe Romero was one of her favorites. John Williams, that would be in the house playing. And they also, my parents liked bluegrass and country music. And when I was small, I had gone to some bluegrass festivals, and I always liked that music. So I had to kind of, and then growing up, it was all rock, like the rock station in New York. And WPLJ was 95.5. You'd hear who's playing, go to see Rush or the Kinks, or I didn't get to hear Zeppelin. Yes, all my favorite bands. So
Yes is
there's a
probably
lot.
one of my favorite bands too. So you fellow Yes
Uh,
fan here, yeah.
Steve Howe, man, I got to meet him once. One of my idols, man. Just in fact, I've got a 175 of almost not the same year, but looks just like his. The one that he plays,
He
same
used to
color.
fly with his guitar in a separate seat.
Yeah, yeah, he's an intense dude. Um, so yeah, and growing up in New York, you could not escape all different kinds of music. You if you were, so I was born in Brooklyn, but I grew, when I was about one, we moved to Queens. So Queens was my neighborhood was, I wouldn't say, I was is fairly like German, Irish, Italian, right? But we'd go into Manhattan, and then it'd be everything, right? You'd be, a complete melting pot. And you could hear music on the streets in the summer, you know. In fact, some of the first Latin stuff that I ever heard was, on the streets in New York. And so you couldn't escape a lot of different types of music. You'd hear it, besides hearing it, on TV shows, you'd hear it out, people playing it from their homes and in their cars. And so I've always liked a broad swath of music. I just like good music. It really doesn't even matter what it is to me, what kind of music. And that's kind of how I've been for my whole career as such, is,
No, that's great. I mean, do you remember when you actually did your first, like, quote unquote jazz gig where you were playing tunes and stuff like that? I mean, I would imagine, because you said you were playing in cover bands and stuff. And then when you go to that other side of the fence, like, do you remember what that was like? The
well,
first
it's
one?
funny. Man, one that's a really good question. That's which I can't remember the exact first time I played a jazz gig, to be honest. But some of the early stuff I used to play. I'm spacing on the club, but it was on 7th Avenue South. It might come to me during the interview, but I used to play there with a great saxophone player, Thomas Chapin, who passed away a number of years ago. Just a real amazing human being and musician. I mean, just fantastic. He was in Chico Hamilton's band for a while and had a bunch of records. I've heard of him. And so I used to play down there. I had like a monthly thing that I got into, and it was
And just in case anyone, the Seventh Avenue, that's the Village, that's the West Village.
yeah, the West Village. For the love of God, I can't right now think of the name of the place. I could see it. Somebody's gonna know and tell me. Remind me.
When I think Seventh Avenue, I think of this place, the Garage, that used to be
Oh
there.
yeah, no, this is way before the
Yeah.
garage. Yeah, this is way. Yeah, I used to play at Arthur's back when I was actually. That's actually that is now one of the earliest places I ever played was Arthur's Tavern, which is still there.
Mhm.
I had learned about maybe 10 tunes, and my teacher was like, just find people to sit in with. He turned me on to this drummer that I used to play with a lot, Art Lillard, and that's where I played in this band with Thomas Chapin. And so I'd go down there, I think it was like on a Wednesday night, and I'd sit in for a couple of songs, and say, what do you want to play? I'd like, Autumn Leaves, okay, and you'd learn a lot. That's the best way to learn is
Well,
on the.
what I wanted to ask you is that, a lot of people can view going into playing those situations, they might get a little intimidated, but it sounds like because you had all this music growing up, like the rock and roll, but also the classical guitar, which is another whole other on the guitar, just so technical. Did you look at jazz like its own world, or was it just kind of like this is just another exciting genre I can explore. Because some people, they once they go jazz, it's like, you catch the bug and like you're a jazz musician, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I definitely. It was funny because some of the rock guys that I played with before I really got into jazz, when I would go back and play with them randomly, I would be soloing more like a jazz guy, and they're like, "What are you playing?" Like play the pentatonic scale. And over time, I learned how to sort of, and it was actually an important lesson. Whatever style you're playing and play that style. You can bring your personal voice to it, and you can bring a little flavor of this and that depending on what the situation calls for and how much looseness there might be. But don't go and play. Don't play in a country band and then start soloing like you're a bebop player. That's not what the job calls for. So I've always been very focused on the job. What am I doing to make fit into the group and be part of that, make the band sound good and stylistically correct.
So when you're in those situations, you know this is how I need to play in this moment, and I need to stay authentic to the style versus like this is how I play in a sense. And
Right. So yes, in a general sort of way, I would say definitely yes. So that I'm aware of, I'm in a group playing music with a particular function on my instrument, and I want to make that band sound good, and I want to be appropriate. I don't want to be like, I'm not one to be like, oh, let me do all this stuff so that I can draw attention to myself. I just want to be part of the, a cog in the machine. But when you said classical, it's funny that you said that because I did not play classical guitar at a young, growing up at all. I heard it, I listened to it, and I always liked it. It wasn't until much later on when I had heard Baden Powell, the great Brazilian guitar player. I don't know if it's Baden or Baden actually. And I was like, I kind of identified with that energy, and I started playing nylon string and played nylon string a lot for many years. And I went and I wrote a bunch of music for solo nylon string guitar, which I recorded for Centaur Records on this album, Dance for One, that I did, of all original compositions. And I wrote the compositions and I couldn't play them well enough the way that I wanted them to sound. And my sort of primitive technique on playing classical. So I went and I studied for, in total, almost 4 years, 3.5 years, with the amazing Michael Lorimer, who was one of Segovia's students. He came up with Christopher Parkany. And man, he kicked my butt like it's never been kicked before. It's like I didn't know what I was getting into. you know. And
Yeah, classical guitar as a whole. I mean, I can only go to as a guitar player, only go to a certain point, but I have
it's
the
a whole
utmost respect for anyone who could play that style, and it's its own thing.
right. And I still wouldn't ever think about going out and playing a classical concert of Bach and Albanese and all the great composers, but I do play that music. I practice that music, and it helps with my technique for playing different types of fingerstyle stuff when I'm doing that.
I imagine that when you talk about this, you sound like just a student of music in life in general, which is, I think, such a great mindset to have when you've been on the scene for decades. And you're always growing, but growth can mean unlearning as well. Do you recall a time where you really had to make a conscious decision, like I need to let this go if I'm gonna get to the next level, so to speak?
Um, do you mean, well, if you're speaking of like let go of particular situations, or musically let go of certain things to
Well, it could be
concentrate?
either. It could be either. That's,
Yeah,
however you view the question. It's
there's
fine.
there's definitely been times. Well, for instance, going and studying with Lorimer after I had already been touring and recording and a professional full-time player and teacher all those years, going back to study with Michael, where he would literally make you play one note at a time, quarter notes, and then he would be judging your stroke, and you do that for 40 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour of this like boop, boop. That's like completely had to sort of change the way I think about how to approach the guitar on one hand, and the left hand, huge change in the left hand in how holding the instrument, excuse me, how to think about the left hand, positioning, and how to get into certain get from point A to point B, let's say, shifting and moving, and the basic movements of the hand and the wrist. I had completely had to relearn the way that I play, because I hadn't really dealt with technique. In most guys don't deal with, if you go take lessons, and I've studied with some of the greatest, in my opinion, jazz players, so Vic Juris being one of them, and Paul Bollenback. Paul, my man. And they would talk a little bit about technique, of course, but not like a sort of technique guru. And Michael was a technique guru, and not everybody could deal with it.
Well, my mentor from Berkeley, he used the Segovia scales to teach you how to play.
Yeah,
and for people who don't know, like you might have to go from like the first fret to the third. Well, not just say the first to third, but like go from 2 frets apart, but then use your first finger and then your pinky to shift to the next position. And
yeah,
it's wild. I'm not sure if you knew him or heard his name, but his name was John Thomas.
no, I
But yeah,
don't.
he was from. But I understand what you're saying when you say like one note, and I would students today, I don't, with attention spans, it's a different. I don't know if they would have the patience. I hope they do, but it's its own thing. I hope you impart that on your students.
I really do. I try to incorporate it into all lessons. I even with the younger kids, or it could be certainly with the college kids and the high school kids. I try to make technique at least some part of the lesson, even if it's for 5 minutes, even if it's somebody playing a pentatonic scale, your basic, first position of the pentatonic scale. What's the hand position like? How are your fingers working? I talk about that every lesson. Now, I don't make people do like 45 minutes or an hour of technique. Most there's very few people that want that, but I make it so that it's part of their consciousness, so they're thinking about it, and it does work. And if you're thinking about it, it does work, and it does help. And where you find where students find that it's working is where they can't play something, and it's because of potentially poor technique, and then they work on that, and then suddenly they get it right. That's our experience as players. So the proof is in the pudding there. And those Segovia scales, which I still practice, that linear movement, like approaching like a violin, like the B minor one is a good example of that, right? So that would be, it goes, yes, it's the third set, right? It goes through the cycle of fifths, C, G, D, and it's relative minor, right? So, and you're coming down that B minor one, and it's more like a violin approach, right? Where you're coming across. I had never done that before studying those, like fully, like you're going across the whole fretboard on one string with those. So exploiting the linear aspect of the guitar.
Yeah, and that's the thing about the guitar. There's a million ways to play it. Up and down, left and right, sideways, but that's the beautiful thing about it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I like to ask people on the podcast is about the life of being a musician. There's a lot of mystery about it, a lot of misconceptions out there. Do you have any ones that you feel I wish more people understood what this life is really like when it comes to being a professional musician? A common misconception, anything like that you think about?
Um, that's a tough question. I would say that maybe, I mean, because everybody experiences things differently and have different interactions with people. So, speaking for myself, I guess there's there's definitely been to for me in my life, there's been times where I could see this sort of negative stigma of being a musician, oh, he's a musician, like it's not a real occupation. Like I didn't want to grow up, so I'm just going to play the guitar.
Yeah, I
Right.
understand. Mm-hmm.
And we know that nothing could be further from the truth, and the amount of work and dedication and obsession you have to have. I talk to students about that, especially the ones that are, aspiring to play professionally. I'm like, you have to be obsessed, and like in other walks of life too, other occupations, if you're a scientist, where you're obsessed with learning and obsessed with just everything that you can know and how can I keep moving myself forward, right? And
You're
that's a life.
never here. It's going up.
Yeah. And so um anybody who's, and I think I think that if you are around a musician that is a professional player, and you see, like, if you're if you're married to one, or if you're a sibling of one, and you see how much work goes into it, it would really, it would change your mind. You'd be like, or not even change your mind, it would inform you how much dedication goes into doing it, beyond just like, people come and see you play, and they see you play for an hour, 2 hours, or whatever, and they think, maybe some people think, oh, that's it, next time I play a gig, I take out my instrument. No,
Yeah, no,
sometimes like
you're
the
talking about
gig.
the quality,
Yeah,
the amount of time that it takes and sacrifice and
yeah,
hours that you
yeah.
have to do.
Yeah, and I'll come home from a gig and I'll be like, man, somebody called that tune. I don't know that tune, and I'll go home and I'll start practicing that tune so I get it in my repertoire. Or I went to hear Rosenwinkel at the Vanguard, and a couple years back, and it just I got home at like 1 in the morning, and I just played until like 4. I was like so pumped. It's like there's no end to it, and that's the beauty. But I think people that really uh, are around a musician and can see what goes into it, the dedication of technique on your instrument, learning, listening, reading, writing. If you're, if how much time do you spend composing, which I certainly spend a lot of time doing that. There's it's a discipline, and it demands all of you. It can't be a part-time thing.
Yeah, I would say that the majority of people don't understand the amount of work that it takes to do this. But and that's a great point. I'm glad you spoke about it. Before this is great. This is and before we wrap up, I was hoping you could also talk a little bit about some things that you're most grateful for in your journey. Like I mentioned, you got to play with some great people out there. So when you think about some of the moments you've had over the last couple decades, any of those gigs stand out for you? Stuff like that.
Man, it's just so many. I mean, first of all, uh, I am I never take it for granted, coming from where I came from and doing what I did for a living before being a musician. Um, I I never, there's not a day goes by that I take it for granted. I appreciate the fact that I get to do what I do every single day, and I mean that with all sincerity. Um, and there's, I mean, every day playing is it's like a gift when you get to play. And whether I'm like, I woke up this morning and the first thing I do, I've been in this routine of practicing the Olivier Messiaen. There's a Guy Lacour's 28 etudes for the saxophone, and I like playing them real slow as my warm up. They're really interesting. So, and they're tricky, so I'll play them very slow, and it's like the most liberating, refreshing, invigorating thing, even better than my extremely strong cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And like, it's like, and I do that, and even if I do that for, like, this morning I did for a half an hour before I started practicing some other stuff, And I was just like, damn, I'm so lucky that I get to do this. Like, I appreciate it. It makes me um, a better human being to
Have
do
you always
that.
been that way? Like you seem just like very positive and just like you're aware of how privileged you are. Have you was ever like a hard time where you may have said, this is because there are those times people can have where they kind of say, this life is very hard, that sort of thing.
Well, no, I mean, I can't say I've always been. I mean, this is an evolution over many years, right? But I've always been a glass half full, excuse me, sort of person, and I always have been aware, um, I would certainly say from my teenage years at least, that there's no guarantee I'm getting up tomorrow morning. No guarantee I'm going to be here tomorrow, and I want to live, So from that perspective, that is kind of my attitude. But it's really, I mean, I feel very blessed. I'm not religious or anything, but blessed in the sense of that I've been able to do what I do and keep it going, and still have this burning desire to keep doing it and the passion for it. And when you speak about things that I'm grateful for, as far as like our highlights, I mean, there's been so many things. I mean, just it doesn't have to be the big tour or record date that makes me feel amazing. Like, it's like often more the little things. Like, a couple of weeks ago, I had a duo gig that I do sometimes, 181 Cabrini, this little place. It's a little bar restaurant in Washington Heights, and I ended up calling a friend of mine, I would say colleague friend, Freddie Bryant, great, amazing jazz guitar player, somebody I really admire, and we never played together before, and he said, "Yeah, I can do that," and we got together and we just called tunes for 2 hours for two sets. And man, that's to me, that's like highlights for me, because it's just real. You go there and I'm like, we started playing, I'm like, holy crap, whoa, what's going on here? And then it's you get very excited, and then you have to like dig down. I mean, like, Freddie's a bad mofo, and so it's like he starts playing, I'm like, oh man, I gotta throw down here, and I love that. And then this past weekend I was playing a duo with great jazz vocalist Vicki Burns. I don't know what we're playing. You show up, put some charts, call some tunes, and it's like, to me, that's like the essence of what I love about music. As much as I love touring and I love doing record dates, I love the intensity of having to learn. I did a recording session last week. I had a bunch of music to learn. You go in and you want to deliver, being prepared. I love that. But really, I like just showing up and playing and not have any idea what's going to happen. That's my favorite.
That's you got the mindset that like I we that you it's just such a great mindset to the way you look at music and the world, and just even you talked about you said you're grateful and you're aware you only have so much time to do this.
Yeah. Well, and just to sort of button that point up, that's where all the preparedness comes into play. It's like, when you're prepared, when you are constantly working on your craft, you can feel good enough to show up and put yourself in that situation. And that's like the payoff, of doing everything. To be able to communicate with somebody that you haven't communicated in that same particular way before, I think is just is sort of the. And it doesn't matter. Again, it doesn't matter if it's a jazz gig or a blues gig, or if it were a country gig, or like, a reggae gig. I played reggae bands for a number of years. Somebody like, hey, you want to play reggae band? Sure. I listened to Bob Marley. I think I could do that. Yeah. Okay, let's go learn how to play reggae. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
No, that's the mind. Where can everybody find your social media and stuff? You just want to plug that before we wrap up, and your website?
Sure. I mean, you can see where I'm playing and check out recordings and things like that, on my web page. It's www.tonyromanomusic.com. I'm at Tony Romano Music both on Facebook and Instagram, and yeah, you can find me there and lurking around the clubs of New York.
No, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Abe. Great talking to you.